How do we, in a time of loss, in a time of, the great forgetting, the great unraveling, whatever you want to call it, precarity in the moment we're in, how do we stubbornly widen our circumference of belonging and compassion? And that's sort of, as if you can imagine, like never ending the orbit of that question, and not being so fixated on an easy answer for that. Where does our pursuit and discipline and excellence meet enoughness? This is it. This is the sentence. This is the sentence that I'm working on. I'm not going to waste your time. I promise you. I'm going to do my best to not waste your time with the sentence, because this is it. This could be the last book you read.
Welcome back to the Wild Lab, everybody. I'm your host, Ned Widener, and today I have a very special guest, Nicholas Triolo. He's a filmmaker, managing editor of Magic Canoe, senior editor at Outside Magazine, trail runner, University of Montana instructor, and he's author of a book that I truly enjoyed, The Way Around, A Field Guide to Going Nowhere. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast today, brother. How you doing today, brother? What's alive for you?
Hey, Ned, thanks for having me. What's alive for me? What a beautiful question. What's alive for me is watching fall all up in western Montana right now. And went for a brisk run this morning, 25 degrees, caught my attention. It's like this platonic color palette of oranges and yellows. I spent the last weekend in the Swan Valley, right northeast of Missoula, where I live, and tracking grizzly bear tracks and wolves and a lot of temperamental weather. Came home feeling pretty vital, pretty alive.
Right on. What were you doing tracking grizzly bear and wolf tracks?
We were I was on a photo shoot actually for a company that we're doing some sort of mountain travel stuff for their work for next year's sort of I guess catalog, some of their sort of materials. Yeah.
Right on. No, that's super. I mean, that's what I do on a pretty regular basis, is track bear, not grizzly, but black bear tracks in the mountains. And the fall is falling. I'm from Ohio, and the falls in Ohio and Kentucky, I think, are vastly underrated. We have a lot of colors, and now I'm in the Eastern Sierra, and we had a really beautiful fall. Like, our aspens were bright yellow but really only for about a week or two. And then it snowed. We had a really early snow, and then just the vast majority of the leaves went away. But
Nice.
I do love the season. It's one of my favorites.
I was thinking that of a previous podcast that you recently did on stillness, and you used the verb crawdad, which I love. And I was actually this sounds, just bear with me. I was watching the maple tree outside my house sort of leave, like let go of its leaves, and I was kind of trying to listen to the moment where the leaf kind of pops off the branch or something, and I was trying to watch as all these leaves kind of a brisk kind of a wind came through, and I was like, wow, you can't actually ever catch. It's really a unique experience to watch a leaf like let go. You see it sort of peripherally, you actually don't. And the more still that I became with this tree sort of surrendering to the season, I was able to sort of, like, my eye was starting to flicker and like really close to catching that moment of release. Anyway, I was like, all right, I got to get more coffee now.
I love that, though. I love that, trying to catch the moment the leaf falls off the tree. I think that's really beautiful, man.
That's it.
And like, I don't want to jump into the book just yet, but I mean, it is that concept of stillness is, I mean, it's a huge concept in your book. But before we get into that place, I want you to tell people a little bit about who you are. You came from. I know you grew up in Northern California, but your parents were both professional tennis players, right? I believe. And I'm just curious about, and you've been a professional trail runner, done some huge races, of which just are blow my mind, quite frankly, the 100-mile race and all of that. I'm curious how the background that you have growing up with professional tennis players as parents and being a trail runner. I'm curious how that background shaped you and shaped your experiences growing up in the wild and wilderness, and the ways in which you interacted with nature.
Yeah. Was born and raised in Northern California. Parents were both in the tennis industry. Mother was, I want to say like top 10. I think she was eighth in the world or something. I don't know. She's gonna fact check me on this, but she was a one of the top female tennis players in the world and was kind of in the ranks of Billie Jean King. And she has a story of like taking Chris Evert in a match once. So she has these really crazy cool stories. I mean, we're talking wood rackets right now, so we're going back a little ways. We're not talking Rolex and multi-million dollar contracts, but she had these incredible stories. She was one of the women that started the Women's Tennis Association, the Women's Tennis League, basically branching off and demanding equal pay or better pay and better conditions for female athletes. Um, so yeah, my parents basically came together around the sport, the gravitational center of tennis. Started a business, started a family. So I guess part of the sort of competitive ecosystem that I was born into was around excellence, was around discipline, was around repetition. I have memories of like my dad sending me out to the tennis court to like with a like three baskets of balls to just like serve until it got dark, and I just hated it. So, but as I got older, got into sort of still stuck with the discipline components, the sort of archetypes or the tectonic plates that were underneath that sort of invitation to be a tennis player, but actually kind of rebelled against whatever my parents were up to. I thought tennis was kind of a square sport, was got into like punk rock and played in several, like as a drummer for several bands, and then was like into soccer and climbing and skating. Um, Eventually circled back, as it were, to tennis as a beautiful sport, as a really cool, beautiful aesthetic, and so a sport that I love now. But I just maybe to kind of get to your question, um, the more I think about it, the less I think about them as being sort of a militant family of your, you know, get out there, and perform at the highest levels, or else we will disown you. I actually
Mm,
think that the family unit was quite nourishing.
mm,
I was telling a friend this recently that I was actually kind of raised by a lot of strong women
mm.
when I was raised, including my mother. And I mean, to speak of the book, she's in the book. You'll meet her in the book, but she's a complex person who I love dearly. But there was a bunch of aunts and cousins who are just these kind of badass women that I just was reflecting recently that sort of brought like kind of raised me. But then as it relates to the wild and outdoors, parents got me out backpacking really early on these like gnarly, like out in the sawtooths. There was this one kind of big loop that my parents took my brother and I on early days. And I remember like a photo I saw recently of me wearing like a Terminator 2 t-shirt, a couple sizes too big, just hating life, kind of like hand deep in a piece of, a bag of gorp, and like kind of a little chubby, and just kind of hating my parents for taking us on this. So my introduction was these big walks, and our parents had great purchase.
Mhm.
My parents had great uh, conviction that we could spend days on our feet out in the woods, and so early,
Yeah.
yeah. And then I'll just speed up and say that at one point my parents got pretty fed up with the Bay Area, its speed, its sort of cultural calibration to success, and tech was kind of on the rise at that point, of course. And so my parents kind of were just over it. So they ended up moving our family to the Sierra Nevada foothills. I don't know exactly where you are on the eastern side, but we were on the western foothills in between like Tahoe and Yosemite, a small town called Murphy's.
Wow, okay. I've spent a lot of time in Murphy's. I lived
No
in
way.
I have, yeah, yeah. When I first moved to California, I moved out here to in 2005 to train horses professionally, and that's what brought me west was the horse. I mean, well, just super cliche, right, and ironic. But I I lived in a small town called Clements, which is near Murphy's, and I lived there for about 6 years. And so we'd go to Murphy's and Angel Camp and the Calaveras County Fair, and all the time. That was a place that I loved. That's crazy, man. Yeah.
Maybe we stirred up trouble at some point together. We didn't even know
It's possible. Yeah.
it. Jumping frogs. We have this the famous jumping frog contest at our fair every May is
Hmm.
one kind of a residual from a Mark Twain short story.
Right.
Sort of a claim to fame up there.
Well, is it the residual from I don't know the history of it necessarily. I thought the festival existed and then Twain wrote the story about it, or are you saying it's the other way around?
I'm going to be embarrassed if I'm incorrect here because I'm from this area, but my recollection is the short story was written about two miners in a bar basically, and then from that story, the fair took on that sort of lore and was like
Mm,
and started jumping frogs at the fair. I don't think the story started at the fair, but I could be totally wrong. Historians from the area could totally fact check me, but
yeah, we
yeah.
can go to the Bret Hart Museum and figure that out. But I didn't. Okay, yeah, you might be right. Now that you say that, I think that does ring a bell. But okay, that's wild, man. Yeah, the west slope of the Sierra is ah, it's vastly different from where I am in the east slope of the Sierra. As you know, I mean, the east slope is just straight up and down, and it's desert floor and then mountain peaks, whereas the west slope, slowly slopes up into the mountains. But it's a vastly different world and with entirely different ecosystems too.
It's crazy how different they are and how close they are. And I'll just say that sort of on a mythopoetic level or something, to have parents, I think about it now, to have parents, uproot one's family, the business, the family business, to really see the value of relocating to a place that was slower. And
Hmm.
those are the first memories of taking off in the woods by myself in the backyard, just kind of just miles of manzanita and pine oak forest. This, that's really where I would say that my environmental ethic was really grounded and formed, sixth grade,
Hmm.
middle school. And I really honor my parents for taking that leap because it's easy not to, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think it would. Yeah, growing up around Murphy's and Angels Camp and the McCollum and the Stanislaus and some of those rivers that are up there would. I mean, that's those even even coming moving there in later years in my life and like in my 20s, they were still very formative parts of my life and still shaped me definitely to who I
Yeah,
am.
the Stanislaus has shaped the contours of my body, my psyche. So many days, so many days on that granite and those waters. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, there's plenty of stories about that. I'm sure, like, yeah, we can share those for another day. But I'm curious. I ask this question to everybody, um, and I want to, or most everybody. I want to ask it to you as well. So, like, somebody, and we'll get to the book, and we'll get to the core and circumambulation, ambulate, if I can say that word right. But like, we'll get to circles, but you've spend a lot of time in the woods. You spend a lot of time running. You spend a lot of time also writing and reading stories about the woods and about, nature and whatnot. And I'm curious in all those experiences, what is your definition of what it means to be wild? And what is your definition of wild?
The first the first definition that comes to me is probably just, you know, pirating words and sentiments from my favorite thinkers and writers, the words that come to mind are self-organizing, are home. There's a certain congruence with one's characteristic of being home, being in
Mhm.
place, and being wild. There's a um, wildness to me is uh, wholeness. That's something Gary Snyder writes a lot about. Wholeness is to be part of something complete, to be part of a system that it feels in alignment with and congruent with and a part of. Um, I think of a couple years ago, actually, where I just was this weekend in the Swan Valley. We were tracking wolves, and I remember stumbling across this wolf track that was just laser straight through this trail. you know, fast. And then there was also the tracker that I was with that knew way more than I did, uh, located a domesticated dog track. And it was this kind of spaghetti factory, kind of all over the place,
Mm,
sniffing everything. And he's like, that's the difference between wildness and domestication. That
mm,
wolf is on a mission. That wolf is disciplined, actually. That wolf has order, a certain sort of archaic, inherited order that it hasn't forgotten. The necessities are true to that wolf. A
mhm,
domesticated dog has got food waiting for her, got some kibble waiting for her,
mhm,
at the end of the day, and can kind of just that level of like looseness. Also a little bit like not necessarily kind of focusing on the matters at hand, the essentials. And so that really woke me up to what the kind of an essential characteristic of what wild is. I just wrote a story in Emergence magazine about this probably one of the most promising rewilding projects in Europe, where they're trying to kind of coax the Iberian lynx back up this river, the
mhm,
Coa River, right in the middle of Portugal. And I thought a lot about what rewilding. I write about it in the piece. Um, but you're watching a homogenized landscape that was sort of over extracted, in sort of industrial agricultural sort of extraction. That human impact had been sort of vanquished, and so this rewilding organization is actually um, reanimating the river with wildness. Is it,
mhm.
this word that we throw around all the time? But they're dead serious about the sort of the trophic vitality of this river. So
Mhm.
I'll just end by saying what wildness I learned meant to these people, which they've spent a lot of time thinking about it, very much like rooted in biology and ecology, is that the Iberian lynx, the wild cat that the Iberian lynx is, the most endangered cat on earth, or it has been.
Mhm.
Um, to coax this cat up this river requires uh, rabbits, right? And
Yeah.
so then you think about rabbits. You're like, what? Okay, how do we get more rabbits? How do we repopulate this? We can't just invite the lynx and the lynx will
Mhm.
show up one day. The lynx requires a whole web of relations, and so that requires rabbits, and then rabbits require what? Grasses, and sedges. So what do so you? I watch these sort of rewilding sort of ecologists look out at the landscape, and when they talk about rewilding, they don't just talk about the sort of hero at the top, the the sexy charismatic lynx. They're like, no, we actually need seed pollinators to bring the grasses, to bring the rabbits, to bring the lynx. And when you talk about wildness, you actually aren't talking about one little cute cat. You're talking about this crazy web of animate web. And so that made me think about wildness differently, not just like the tiger or the bear, but like actually the less sexier, maybe less like individualized material, and more of it like as a dialogue.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think the web, the tapestry, the patchwork that makes up an entire ecosystem, right, is of being wild. And it's I have property back in Ohio from where I grew up. I mean, not 50 acres on a horse farm, and I've been as much as I can been doing a rewilding project there on my own because we have lots of honeysuckle that have like just taken over everything. The ash borer beetle came in and killed all the ash trees, and when I was growing up, there were grouse and there were quail, and now there's no grouse, there's no quail. There's lots of huge big deer that like hunters really love, and there's lots of turkey, but there's not a diversity of creatures, and that's the web and the tapestry that you're talking about. That's the one thing that I've really been trying to cultivate because that's the thing that has been lost, right? We either have vast swaths of forest or concrete or suburbs, but we don't have like this patchwork, which is what would have created the habitat and the ecosystem to bring back these tiny little birds, which are the quail that I would really love to bring back the bob white quail. It's because it's a memory of my childhood, but it's also a hallmark of a healthy ecosystem, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, I'd love to bring back the bobcats, and there's some there, and some of those larger megafauna, but it's really the small things that I'm mostly interested in that project. But
That's
I,
it.
I, I, I want to touch on something else you said that I really like in that answer, which is discipline. 'Cause
Uh-huh.
that's not an answer that I've had. I asked a lot of people
Uh,
this question, and that's not an answer that I have. 'Cause when we think about I think often when we think about discipline, and even when you use the word discipline earlier when you were describing, like, your parents, right?
mhm.
Like, th it was more of a domestication process in a way, right? But the way that you just described it, which is, by the way, totally right and apt and dead on, is the wolf has a mission. The wolf is laser focused, and the dog is, all around here. And also, I mean, you can like in the way that, and I'm sure that the trackers said this to you, but like the way that their paws look, right? Like the claws of the dog is usually like bent or this way or that way. It's not aligned. It's not uniform. And I hadn't put it into that word, but I really like that distillment of wildness as discipline. I think that's really, yeah, really apt. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I
Appreciate
don't
it.
know. I don't know if that works, but for some reason it makes sense to me. It's a sort of a synonym of um, a fidelity to order, or not, yeah, like not like a goal oriented sort of like but also, I mean, like a presencing, a deep sort of presencing, not as even a choice, but a discipline, the presence, like
Mhm.
yeah, there seems to be something in that that's interesting to me. You know, God, I'm thinking about this bear that we were coming across their tracks this weekend. This bear was having a bowel problem, like GI
Mm,
distress. This grizzly
mhm.
bear, and there was every quarter mile with these big droppings of ash berries in this these big droppings. And I don't know. I just something about it felt both alarming, like we felt sort of concerned for the bear's, getting ready for winter and not being able to hold the sustenance in its belly, and kind of having to drop it every quarter mile. But also was watching the tracks and watching the sort of a little bit of the urgency in the bear's
Mhm.
scat in some ways.
Mhm.
Like what, and not as like a, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm gonna die, but like a, I'm my imperative, the discipline that I have to adhere to right now before shit gets cold and winter
Mhm.
comes through, is to find food and find it fast and figure out my system. So like the bear's choices to nibble on the ash berries. There was also some sort of hair, and anyway, I can get into it, but there was like
Yeah,
a
yeah.
signature of wisdom, I guess, and not to sound too sort of, you know, romantic about it, but it felt it very the imperative, the urgency of the season coming in, this animal, this wild creature, needing to figure out how to store food for the coming winter, not only for him, not only for the individual, but for the fam. So yeah, I found that the signature discipline in the scat of this grizzly bear a couple days ago, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, and it's nuanced, right? It's not just discipline. Discipline equals domestication and chaos equals wildness, right? Which I
Yeah,
think if we were to back up and ask maybe 100 people, that might be more the answer that we get. But there's a lot of nuance to these things, right? And something can be it can be both. It can be both domestic and feral and wild. It can be all of those things. And it doesn't just have to be no, discipline means going to school and docile bodies and institutionalization and all of those things. No, it also means survival. It also means mission, created, going towards your mission and living the life that you actually want to live. So yeah, I love that. I love that. Yeah,
yeah. I mean, discipline to write a book, discipline to
for sure.
start a family, discipline to learn a craft. Yeah, absolutely. God, I had a thought. I lost it. It'll come back.
Well, let's discipline to write a book. Let's talk about the way around, man, because I really enjoy it. What was your impetus for writing this book? Like where I know it's a long journey. I mean, it's reflective in the book, even though it's a very short book. I mean, it's only like 170 something pages, right? But there's a lot in that 170 pages. And so talk to me about like what brought you to it? How did this start?
It's hard to really understand I guess with any circuitous pilgrimage or route, sometimes it's hard to fully mark the beginning of where it ends and where it begins and where it
Mhm.
ends.
Mhm.
Um, the book, The Way Around, started um, with probably what I would mark as the first time that I was overwhelmed by an invitation by the world, other than something that I had manufactured. And I know that sounds maybe sort of in the clouds, but for the first time in like the tail end of my undergraduate years, let's talk 2005, four, something turned me towards wanting to take a full lap around the Earth, around the planet. In my late teens, early 20s, this sort of round the world romance was asking questions about what it meant to live here on this planet. Was also asking questions in my studies. In my was starting to read like Naomi Klein and a little like anti-capitalist literature, and just kind of unlearning some of the stuff that I'd sort of been indoctrinated into, and just becoming a little bit of a skeptic in general, like about all that I'd been learning about power, et cetera, economic systems. And so I was just like, where am I right now? Where am I situated on as a citizen of this thing we call United States? I'm an Earthling. Like, what the hell does that even mean? So I got this invitation, this little like bony finger in the corner, kind of telling me to come this way, and it was to go around the circumference of the planet, which is weird, I know, and superlative. It was this like big, like all wrapped up in privilege, all wrapped up in,
Hmm.
me being able to go home and live with my father for 10 months while I worked carpentry and served tables and tutored math and saved money to be able to do something like this. Totally understand that. Ended up going on this like 1 year around the world trip, which gets to your question, and gets to the heart of this book, is that on this month 10 of this crazy trip I took by myself to understand who I was in relationship with this world, this sort of 25,000 foot circumnavigation around the planet, I stumbled across Cora. Cora is a much more romantic, beautiful word that describes the clunky term that you said, circumambulation, which is
That's it.
totally,
Yeah.
imagine having to write that word a million times, because
Right.
I
I'd be copy
absolutely did
pasting.
copy paste a lot of
Yeah.
that. Cora had this aesthetic. I basically kind of stumbled across, and you'll see it in the prologue. Um, was exposed to this circuitous pilgrimage, just walking around Bodanan and Kathmandu, and it really actually it stopped me in my tracks and struck me as a really interesting counter movement, counter narrative to this like muscular, the more countries the better, the more lovers the better, the more wild experiences that I could have late night in bars and etc. that I was like accumulating on this trip, because that's what you do to be a sort of a Western, like a world traveler, and all that sort of travel literature.
Hmm.
Um, and all of a sudden I was just like, oh, this is actually these were mainly Tibetan exiles, from their homeland. So they were actually living in Kathmandu and Bodhana, and walking Kora in circles around this this temple. Was actually, the stupa was a process of remembering, like a memory, basically a kinesthetic form of memory, a kinesthetic form of remembering where they came from and who they are. Not just not just to get some laps. Um, and so something about that, I was 20, 21 years old, and that was like, that rocked my world. And that seeded a 20-year inquiry about how to be a better steward of place, how to live closer to home. And I came home from that and started running long distances in Portland, Oregon. Started running kind of serendipitously and um, around volcanoes in the Pacific Northwest that are all these
Hmm.
orbital. You look out from Portland and you see all these sort of these stratovolcanoes in the horizon. Helen's, Hood, Jefferson, Adams, Mount Rainier, the Sisters, and they're all around all of them. Pretty much all of them. There's like these beautiful kind of orbital trails that you can take, right? And
Hmm.
so maybe a lot of your listeners have walked some of these, run some of these. I started running them with friends there. We do these like 30-mile loops, and then Mount Hood would be this 45-mile loop. That was just probably the best day on foot one could imagine. This 45, perfect, difficult, challenging. And what's so cool about these loops is that you get this really interesting profile of the mountain. I'd spent a lot of time going up mountains and going down to kind of summits, but that circumnavigation or circumambulating a mountain, you get this like 360-degree full send, this full profile of a place.
Mm.
I felt the mountain differently. And I mean that like in my body. I don't mean that like in poetry. I mean that like quite literally. And that started this inquiry about power, all these things kind of coming to a confluence of like, what's up with mountaineering where we're all so obsessed with the top, you know? What's
Mm,
and I'm implicating myself in this too. I want to be clear. I'm not too good for summits. Um, I spent a lot of time seeking summits, and what was behind that? I started asking that question as I got deeper into long distance running, ultra running as they call it, and as that was deepened through going around these mountains as well as up. But they started around mountains, and that got me into these like deeper miles and 50Ks, 50 miles, and then as you mentioned, these 100-mile races, and nowadays they're getting like 200-mile races. There might even be a 300-mile race that they're starting to put together. So there's like a 6-day race. There's like
no, thank you.
so
But
yeah, no, it just goes forever, which is sort of the conceit of the book. Like, how far do we go? Like, how many peaks do you need to bag to feel like you're a hero? Um,
yeah.
and I hit a point in my career as a competitive long distance runner where I ran this race called the Western States 100-mile race. It's kind of like a big race in the scene. It's in California. It goes from basically like Lake Tahoe to Auburn, kind of near Sacramento,
Hmm.
and it's a trail race. It's an incredible course. And I just sort of hit a wall where I was singularly minded, obsessed with performing at my best, which is, it's complicated, and I couldn't see anything else. I couldn't see. I didn't feel very intimate with the landscape.
Hmm.
I was very much locked in the mindset of more is better, and that that sets up the book. And I'll stop talking because the book is not about running, but it is about what do we lose in the sort of pursuit of conquest, or
Mm,
the never ending. I don't know if that sounds cliche, but the never ending pursuit of something other than like what's right in front of our faces. And so it's this tension that I still hold to this day after having published this book.
mm,
Where does our pursuit and discipline and excellence meet enoughness? Where does that live? And we're seeing that in our failing sort of economic systems, our failing ecologies,
mhm,
that we're over harvesting, we're over extracting. Any sort of ethic of reciprocity is out the window, um, which implies a sort of taking more than we're giving back. And I saw that in the culture of recreation culture that I was
for
a part
sure.
of, that my people, my friends, my community, the very language, peak bagging, we're gonna bomb
Hmm.
down the mountain, we're gonna like
Hmm.
summit that shit, we're gonna take it all, we're taking, there was a lot of taking vernacular that I was using, that other friends of mine, that you see to this day, and I had a bone to pick with that. So that's sort of what teed up the book, and the book basically follows three circumambulations around the world, starting in Mount Kailash in Tibet and moving to Northern California around the
Hmm.
base of Mount Tamalpais, a much more humble mountain, and then
Mm,
the third and final lap, or round as I call it in the book, is around actually a, a abandoned copper mine in the center of Montana called the Berkeley Pit, it's the largest Superfund site in the country. It's part of the largest Superfund site complex, and I walk 20 miles around the rim of this that's very toxic pit, this pit that you can kind of see from space. It's huge, and so that's sort of the architecture of the book.
yeah. Which, by the way, I think the the Berkeley Pit chapter, not chapter, but the section on the Berkeley Pit is by far my favorite writing in the book.
Thanks.
It's my favorite, and I think, well, I mean, I have I have some personal experiences with the Berkeley Pit as well, but that's, neither here nor there. I think I one thing that I really love that you're talking about in this book, and just in that answer as well, is what do we lose in the pursuit of conquest and the pursuit of enoughness, of pursuit of trying to help make ourselves feel like we are enough. And I've done a lot of climbing. I've done a fair amount of climbing in the Pacific Northwest. Like, I've summited Rainier a couple of times, and, Hood, a number of peaks. It was often, I think, in retrospect, when I look at it, in pursuit of making myself feel more like a man, making myself feel like I've conquered something, accomplished, like I was enough. Because that's something that I've dealt with a lot over my existence, and I'm through it now. But for many, many years, that was sort of my narrative. And I think about, like, all the times that I think about, like, a few times in particular that I've summited Rainier. One time specifically, I summited Rainier with some old high school friends, and I just remember getting to the top, and one of my friend, he said something like, and it just rubbed me so wrong that day, but he was like, "Yo, we conquered that bitch," and I was like,
Yeah.
man, like, that just it doesn't feel right, because I had, I'd tried to summit it many times and hadn't accomplished it, and, like, there's much more of a what I read in your book, and also it's a big part of the practice that I'm doing in this podcast and with, the work that I'm doing, Walker School of Wild, but is trying to get out of the narrative and the language of conquest and more into the language of conversation. Right? Because of all the times that I tried to summit or did summit Mount Rainier, I think the time that I truly enjoyed it the most was the time that I did the Wonderland Trail around it, right? And I mean, people do that in like 5 days. I don't know how you did. Well, we took like 10 days to do it, you know, and we did it slowly and took in the wildflowers and took in the glaciers and like, I think, as you said, in that it wasn't, I wouldn't call it a Cora in what we did. I would still call it a circumnavigation of it, because I don't think that was, that wasn't in my mind at the time, but it was much slower. It was much more immersive, and was much more appreciative. And I got to know the mountain. Like, when I was on the mountain, on the glacier, like, I was really in here more, right? I was really like fighting the demons in me and like taking that next step. Whereas, like, when I was going around it, I felt much more immersed within it. I felt much more a part of the land and the ecosystem and the mountain itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I just wrote down the word conversation, one in the drafting of this book, I had this one day where I sort of wrote this sort of T chart and I was like, conquest.
Mm,
Like, that's sort of that was a central seed that was like I built a lot of muscle, a lot of words were wrapped around that word, in this book, because that was totally, King of the Mountain, conquering. You see that everywhere, if you really look
hmm
hard culturally, not only in mountain culture, of course, but you see that everywhere, obviously in politics and um, the War Department, as it were. So, um,
right. Yeah.
but it's interesting because I love that, because one of these exercises I did for my drafting of this book was to actually take these big questions or these big sort of antagonisms for me and actually kind of what were the opposites to those words, so what is the opposite of conquest? Is it surrender? What are the words that are synonyms of conquest? What are the other words that come up for me? Take, winning,
hmm
victory, whatever it is, so and I basically spent a whole day with trying to understand the sort of those words and also their opposites, not to like reinforce the binary so much as to understand what it was that I was actually in conversation, which is what you just said. I love that you countered conquest with conversation, as it relates to the work that you're doing, which I love. One word that I also used was something like curiosity, and curiosity almost sounds a little too ambiguous. I actually like conversation. Conversation feels a little more active, in some ways. Although curiosity was a guiding word for me, a guiding, um, counterfactual, or counter, felt like to divest from the conquering mind was to actually, double down on curiosity. And so you'll
Mm,
see that, I think that in the book, not to recenter the book, I'm not trying to, but to actually
yeah.
recenter the ideas therein,
Yeah.
which is, um, in every round, you'll actually be invited into a landscape, like an actual topographic, like we'll take you to the western edge of the Tibetan Plateau and through the environmental and political sort of realities on the ground. But then you'll also, and I love this, and I'm actually teaching some of this, soon, so much in nature writing, like the human has been sort of removed, you know. It's like kind of
Uh, uh-huh.
the ode to a tree, and this is not, this has sort of been like I'm taken down enough to where I don't need to kind of say it again, but like I'm very much of the writing of the tradition that humans are not central to nature writing, but they're really important to remain part of the narrative. Absolutely. When we lose, when we sort of triple down on sort of the more than human world as the only thing that's happening in a narrative, we actually kind of I think we lose an opportunity for deepening our relationship with the very uh, non-human world that we so desperately want to sort of become intimate with. I think that actually it's through the prism of the human, of some of the human relations, that we can actually loosen the warm up the body and loosen up the heart space to actually then walk deeper into seeing the more than human world and all its animacy. So I actually, my personal opinion is, I really centered some characters in all three of my rounds. Every round you'll meet a pretty primary character. The first of which is this kind of bombastic um, Canadian man who everyone sort of. It's like that guy in a group tour that you've done where like they talk too much, they kind of scratch themselves in weird
Right.
places, and they're just kind of
Yeah.
loud, kind of mansplaining. And this guy was that, and he was also, for some reason, you know, mystery or whatever, put smashed us together as like roommates because we were both solo travelers on that trip. And I had more surface area contact with this guy than most others. And by the end, you reveal, as I'm bringing you into the history and the political complexities and the philosophy of walking in circles, you find yourself walking circles around this character in the book. And so in conversation, to use your word, I learned to actually, in my interest in Cora or circumambulation as a sort of counter narrative to conquest, what I also learned, and what I learned in both the first, second, and third rounds, is to actually I was actually in conversation with another element that was hidden and that was revealed to me along the
Right.
way. And
Right.
so as I go out to like this idea of what I was going to get, which
Hmm.
was this sort of epiphanous idea of walking circles as some ecological, you know, mimicry, as it were. I was also ended up like being surprised by the human relationships and the conversations I was having that actually ended up bringing me in more humble relationship with the very landscapes I was walking through. So this guy
Yeah.
had been carrying, you know, a sort of grief in his pocket. He has this whole kind of reveal at the end of that round. It like kind of breaks my heart, breaks the reader's heart, and breaks the heart into a greater sort of circumference of compassion. It's kind of what I think I say that somewhere,
Hmm.
which is sort of the heartbeat of the book, is how do we, in a time of loss, in a time of, you know, the great forgetting, the great unraveling, whatever you want to call it, you know, precarity in the moment we're in, how do we like stubbornly widen our circumference of belonging and compassion? And
Hmm.
that's sort of, as if you can imagine, like never ending the orbit of that question, and not being so fixated on an easy answer for that. And maybe the question is enough, you know. Um, so yeah,
Mm.
anyway.
No, it's, and I mean, that's, I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that, the metaphor of circle, which is is the book, or a huge part of the book, but I'm curious how it has continued, because I would imagine that, you know, and I know how the books have many lives, and it just doesn't end, well, you've published a book, now it's over, Nick, like that's done, and that's that metaphor, and it serves no purpose in your life anymore. I'm curious how that, the circular, the metaphor of the circle has been instrumental in your life, and I know that's in the book, but also going forward, like, how has it impacted you after writing the book? And, you know, the way, the public perception of the book, and the way that, like, I mean, books have a life of their own, and, you know, you put your words down on the page, and they can be received in a variety of different ways that are 1,000% out of your control. And so I'm just curious if that metaphor has served you after, you know, publication and continuing.
Yeah, it's funny. I had the great honor of interviewing Robert McFarlane. He's one of my favorite writers.
Mm.
A month before the book came out, the official pub date for his book is A River Alive, which all of your listeners should stop listening to this and go buy that book.
Right.
And then come back and finish the podcast. The And I bring it up to say that it happened a month before the official pub date, and I was nervous. You know, I read all his books again and researched his life and et cetera. And um, it felt like the launch of the book. And so it actually didn't like, so I've been working on this thing for several years. As some of your listeners might, you know, you're working on a big multi-year project and you have this sort of idea that there's a date on the calendar. And when that date comes, you're going to wake up and there's going to be balloons flying out of your mailbox and
Right,
you're
right.
going to get 1,000 star reviews on Amazon or whatever.
Yeah.
Everyone's going to want your time, you know, Oprah's going to call, etc. Uh, you know, it's interesting because the publication, God, I explained it to someone recently. It's not that it was like, it was so, it was a release. And I bring up the McFarlane thing because it was like a month long sort of release for me because the month of June is when like it happened in early June and then the pub date was on July 8th. So it was like this kind of like extended release into the world. And even before that, of course, you're trying to kind of invite your community and social media into pre-ordering the book and all, you know, the whole machinery of getting people excited about the book and blurbs. And so by the time you get to like the actual date on your calendar, the unit of the day of this what we call pub date, it was almost like it had already crawled out of the cave, you
Mm.
know, and it was like crawling around, you know, and it was this like,
Book, you mean?
yeah, the book. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
book.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Like the book was out there, you know. And so I guess I just say that to say that what I learned about like the circle itself as a shape of and a sort of a theory of mind or a theory of curiosity or conversation with the world or like a shape of that shaped the launch of this book in some ways because it kind of shapeshifted. It wasn't like a day where um it was before and after. It was like this long bleed, and all of a sudden there was like a different conversation was happening. It's like when you flip your skin from the inside out, something that you've been so private about is all of a sudden, and not all of a sudden, but gradually becomes like you're flipping your skin so that now people can like see this thing that you've held so privately. And that felt less like a instantaneous before and after, you know, BCAD kind of thing, and more of like it almost felt like I don't want to say melancholy or something, but it felt like this like slow release of something. It was a deep sense of satisfaction. But I to your point, to your question, and that changed that was a function of the book itself and the contents in this book changing my relationship with accomplishment, I think, in some ways, because now the book itself is having its own it's having its own dialogue with the world and with the readers, for example.
Right.
And this is the scale of this book. I mean, think about like Ocean Vuong or someone who's millions of readers. I mean, who knows, you know, how many people have read this book so far, but I'm proud of it. I've gotten a lot of feedback that's been really generative and positive, a lot of beautiful questions and responses to various parts of the book. But that's its own lap, you know. I'm starting this like this new lap where I'm walking around the mystery of this thing, asking myself like, what even really is this book? Like, what even is a book? Like, why even?
Mm.
I mean, I know you're working on a long form project too. Like, it's a devotional practice,
Absolutely.
and then
Yeah.
it condenses into something we call a book with 178 pages or whatever that it can be put on a shelf. But it's actually just like this condensed opportunity to be in dialogue with the world. You know, you kind of get this
Mhm.
calling card now where you're like, cool, I just finished up like a 20 stop tour and like talked to a lot of people about it. A lot of people came up, you know, book signing, telling me stories about the crazy things they've encircled
Mm.
or how it's made them think differently about grief and power. And a lot of moms coming up buying the book for their kid, like their boys, because they think that it's actually a really interesting treatise on power and on patriarchy, which I think is true. And so so I'm actually being reformatted as it becomes a public object, and my conversation with the project itself is kind of updated, upgraded, deepened, and it's not even like a book it's gonna collect dust. It's like an alive organism that's
Right.
taking another lap with me, and I'm looking at it every day, being like, what actually are you, and where are you sending me? Like, what is the
Mhm.
centrifugal force that's sending me to whatever's coming next, you know? And so that's how it's changed me, and it's beautiful. I'm not fixed on the inertness of its success as this thing and its the only thing. I'm actually really seeing it as like a dynamic, fluid, condensed expression that's actually kind of also an arrow pointing me to what's around the bend, as it were. So I don't know. Yeah.
No, I love that, man. You know, and of the many things that I do, and I don't know, I don't mention this very often on this podcast, but I'm also a creative writing professor, a college professor, right? So, and one of the things that I'm so often trying to get my students to understand is the power of language and the power of like revision and the healing power of writing. And it's
Yes.
when what I got in your answer was a lot of that, right? And I'd love to hear you talk more about that. Like just because there's the reception of it, which I'm sure, as you said, takes on a life of its own, and it's its own thing, and it becomes a fluid entity that is now out of your control. But I'm also curious in the process of it, maybe in the revision process and any stages that you want to talk about, like how what level of reflection the level of reflection that is required to that to produce something like this, the way like something like the way of round, like how did that process change you, or how does it
Yeah.
like also help you understand yourself?
Yeah. I mean, revision. What did Stegner say? This is problematic or something. But he said, like, Stegner or revision separates the men from the boys, or women from the girls,
Hmm.
et cetera. And I hold that so true. Not only as a craft invitation for your students or for my students, but think of revision as like a um not I mean like a dare I say spiritual practice, where you're
Hmm.
actually doing laps and laps, and you're washing the sentences with warm water and soap, and you're being really like you're being really like kind to it. It's not some like it can be actually it can be a playful process, and at times this was, and sometimes I lit it on fire literally, and I was like, I'm like,
Yeah, sure.
get the hell out of here, But revision is you think about revision as a practice of not only revision for like paper, words on paper, but revision, consideration, curiosity about your own hardened ways of being in the world and seeing in the world. Your
Hmm.
your over commitment to the darlings, and
Hmm.
and the hubris in that, the hubris that you carry around with you that you don't even see. Uh, and on that, and not only like the subtraction of letting go of a lot of things. And this book was probably almost twice as long in an earlier form. This the svelte 107 like sub 200 page book that it now is, really, I asked myself over and over, and I read it out loud to myself over and over, and I asked, like, is this sentence doing anything? And if it wasn't, like, I just and so you think about that question: is this moment, is this breath of mine actually, am I here for this breath right now? Am I actually like writing a pretty flabby sentence of a breath or of a life? Am I actually not actually conscious of the breath I'm taking right now? And you can think about that in terms of writing, like the life as a sort of a, you know, intention as a form of revision, and I feel really good about the length, as a really crystallized expression that feels intentional, And I guess
Hmm.
in my life, I'm trying to simplify and simplify, and you know, you must change your life, as Rilke says, like you must change the ways that you write your life. And yeah, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but the I took revision at a craft level. I took revision obsessively seriously, over and over, focusing on verbs and nouns and the song and the rhythm of it. I'm a percussionist, so I do think of the sound of prose, and also just what is this doing to move the reader, move the locomotion, the inertia of the story. Is
Hmm.
this just showing off? What is this doing?
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's a that extends way beyond a book. And so a
Totally.
book is just a cool little excuse to like get humble with yourself and like
Hmm.
focus on the essentials.
I do.
If you can see it as such, it's way more fun that way, I think. So I learned a lot in that way, and I hope the next book will be a little more smooth and not take 8 years.
Is that how long it took you? It was 8 years. Yeah.
Yeah, apparently it took
Yeah.
me 8 years to be humbled by the world. Yeah, my
Yeah.
ego needed that, I think.
Yeah. No, I resonate with that. Fortunately or unfortunately at this moment, but
Yeah,
but I love it. Is this sentence doing anything? I mean, it's something I say in my classes a lot, but I love the metaphor of, is this sentence doing anything, and is this breath doing anything? Like, what are the choices that what are the choices that I'm making in my writing, but also like, what are the choices that I'm making in my life?
yeah, yeah,
I think it's a powerful metaphor, and I think, at least in my own process when I'm distilling, it's still a very messy, muddy process, to be quite honest with you. But like in my process, when I'm distilling that question of, is this sentence doing anything? And is this choice, what is this choice, or what is this breath doing in my own life? Um, it is really easy to get caught up, as you called them, the darlings, but these things that I get really attached to, these pieces I get really attached to in my writing, or these pieces that I get really attached to in my life, you know, that can uh, bring it back to the wolf and the dog metaphor, that can like take me away from my mission, my laser mission of the wolf, right? And lead me more on a, not a circular, but a mindless and pointless, meandering through the woods that is not, not serving my purpose and is not serving my direction or my heart. If that makes sense. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And there's also, there's like well, there's a balance there. I keep on thinking about, I've been really thinking about surprise, being surprised by what unfolds, not being so. I interviewed one of my dear friends in the mountain, Black Diamond athlete,
Mm.
Joe Grant, years ago, and he's an incredible artist, by the way. You should have him on this podcast.
Mm.
Joe Grant,
Joe
dear
Grant.
friend, one of,
Yeah.
one of my best friends. He's a photographer, and we would talk about this as going to the attempt of this, a big cycling, running sort of circumnavigation of his home mountain range or something. Um, if he showed up at the trailhead with an idea of how it would go, how long it would take, or what the story was that he was going to then write about or take a photo of, that was contrived for him. He was like,
Mhm.
so he wanted to show up empty, you know, and I just think about that when I think about, the balance between showing up with a plan or being sort of invited into the world in a particular way that then will give shape to a story or a book that you're writing, for example, some particular shape. And this in my case, not just like literally a shape, like the circle is literally a shape, I realize, but like some sort of condensed form of an invitation by the world for you to be in deeper relationship with the world and with yourself. Um, it requires both like an acuity and a specificity, and also like a relinquishing of that too. Like it requires um like not showing up with a preconceived idea of what's going to happen, because
Yeah.
then you're already locked in a little bit. And I don't know if that responds to what you said, but I love what you're saying, and I think that there's some balance that I'm carrying with me now into whatever comes next. Um, that is centering like the buoyancy of surprise, and also just like really trusting when there's like a trust when something gets your attention and doesn't let go. Like this book, I just was like obsessed with this idea of people like endlessly walking in circles as sort of a beautiful pilgrimage to nowhere. That didn't that's the stubborn nature of that shape or that story, like just wouldn't let me go. And that's, I don't say that to say like good job, Nick. I say that like whoever's listening, or I wish I told that to my younger self, to trust
Right.
those invitations. That's
Yeah.
not just you. That's like what you talk about in your podcast. You're being shaped by the living world,
Mhm.
and therefore, and then you are co-creating. You're really listening and being humbled by that, being shaped, and then you help to shape.
Mhm.
That's revision right there.
Yeah. And I would imagine those women or those mothers that said that it was a treatise on patriarchy, that your book was a treatise on patriarchy. I would imagine that part of what they were talking about is exactly what you just said,
Yeah, totally.
right? Um, because it is, even in my previous response to your answer, it is a balance. It is a nuance. It isn't, there, which is one of the reasons why I love your book, right? It's the circumambulation, right? And going nowhere, as opposed to this, conquering the mountain directed. I got to get to the top without, no questions asked, whatever. And there's like, direction is great, and having clarity in your words is great, and having clarity in your presence is great. And at the same time, it is extremely important to slow down, to be still, to go nowhere, and to be okay with that, right? And I think it's not just one or the other. There's a hell of a lot of nuance in it, and that's one of the things that's very clear in your book, because you do summon, well, somewhat of a peak here, right?
Hmm.
You do, and
Yeah,
it's so
yeah, yeah,
it's not just, it is the going nowhere, but it's more nuanced than that, right?
yeah. It makes me think of two things. One, you talking about like the turbidity of the water in order to see the bottom of the, what was it, the creek or something, to get to the
Mm-hmm.
crawdads or something. Like you need that stillness to then decisively act. I mean, you're not just like so that's important that you're doing both. You're like slowing down, you're being still, but then you have a task. Like your
Mm-hmm.
stomach's rumbling.
Yeah.
I think about Gary Snyder. I think it was Gary Snyder who talked about how he'd like, it might have been Yvon Chouinard, to some old white dude talking
Yeah.
about how he like they used to go and cast in the river, and then one day, next year they come back and they clip their hooks and they just cast without hooks.
I think it
You
was
know,
Chenard. Yeah.
it was, and then at some point they just like jumped in. They jumped in
Yeah.
the water.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a cliche, but I that sort of I don't know why that came to mind for me, but a sense of active participation. You know, I am not just sitting back every morning with no just circling back to discipline, which I love that we brought that up in the beginning. That really sort of calibrated this conversation, because I get up every morning and I work on I haven't for a few weeks because I'm just giving myself a little bit of a break recently, but I usually get up and I sort of blue collar it to like work on bad sentences at my desk in the dark with too
Yeah.
many cups of
Sure.
coffee, and it's not romantic. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but that feels, and so that requires discipline and ambition, and it's not, I'm trying to sort of relinquish any sort of understanding of where that's being banked. What, like, is that so that I can write a follow up to this book? No, of course not. Like it's actually trying to center the practice as a conversation. I mean, I literally have this on a sticky note somewhere. Like writing is having a conversation with God or the world or whatever you want to call it, mystery. It has the marketing, the marketplace component of it is actually quite its own world. And I'm trying to sort of divest attention on that. Not to say that that's not important, because it is, of course. And also the conversation, which is what those words you said are central to this work.
Well, thank you, brother. I really appreciate it, and thank you for the conversation that you've put out into the world.
Hey.
I think it's a not to be cliche, but I do. I think it's a beautiful one. I wanna be respectful of your time. But I want to give you an opportunity, if there's one last thing that you want to say to our audience, or something you want to leave our audience with, be it a message or a learning from the book, or what have you. I'm going to give you the last word.
I actually will end with someone else's words that's in the book,
Yeah.
who's sort of the Pettibon, who's sort of the primary character in the second round, which is probably the most. It's around Tamalpais, this mountain in Northern California. I follow these beat poets around, kind of the ghosts of these beat poets around this 14-mile spiral walk. And Laura Pettibon is like this sort of the leader of this pilgrimage, this walk, because she's done it every several times a year for decades, and she died in the making of this book, of a tumor of cancer that's articulated in the book. But this is in the book, and I'll just leave it with your readers. When I went to go see her and spent some time with her, I took her to sort of chemotherapy sessions, and one time we got burritos, went back to her San Francisco apartment, and ate lunch and was talking to her. And as I left, I think it was like taped to the stairwell was this like ratty piece of paper, and all it said in all caps was "This is it. This is it" in Sharpie. And it's in the book, but it really is an ongoing. It might sound trite, but it's an ongoing mantra and meditation for me that I carry with me, thanks to her and my friendship with her. Every day before she walked out into the world, she would ask herself, she would tell herself, she would remind herself that this is it. This is like, and you can say that in different inflections, right? You can be like, this is it? What? Or you can be like, no, no,
Right.
like this conversation with Ned is it.
Mm.
You know, this
Yeah.
might be our last chance. Um, and this might be our last lap, or maybe not. Who know? Who knows? But I love the sort of the immediacy and the being able to sit outside this morning and watch fall, to watch those leaves and to have to as calibrated by your podcast of stillness and slowness to be able to see the order of it all. As you know, this is what we have. You know, this is what has us, and um, taking that really seriously.
Mm.
Taking that really seriously as parents age. My mother's not getting any younger. Her days are numbered. My dad's. So being able to recognize that in pretty much every unit of my life, that this is it. This is the sentence. This is the sentence that I'm working on. That's I'm not going to waste your time. I promise you. I'm going to do my best to not waste your time with the sentence, because this is it. This could be the last book you read. Um, I don't know. That feels both cliche to me and also like maybe the most profound thing. You know. So maybe I'll end there.
Yeah. This is it.
This is it.
I love it. I love it, brother. If people want to buy your book, they want to find you. Where do they find you? Where do they find the book?
Hello.net. I don't know who does not .nets anymore, but that's my, I don't know. That's what's happening. I'm on Instagram. I got a Substack that I'm actually pretty proud of called the Jasmine Dialogues.
Right, yeah.
Actually, less about Instagram, like on my personal account, but I have a really fun little nerdy account called the Mandorla 200 for any readers out there. The Mandorla is Italian for almond, and the 200 is I'm reading 200 books on place, justice, or ecology, place, and justice. And I'm reading 200 books and writing 200 word like little almond synopses about all of them. And so that's a fun project. I'm on like book 168 or something like that. So I'm getting up there. I'm getting close.
Yeah.
So that's mainly just a resource. I'm not trying to flex here. It's a great resource. I get behind every book I post.
Right. Right on.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Nick. Really appreciate the conversation, brother, and enjoy the fall out there, man.
Hey, you too, Ned. Thanks so much. That was great.
We'll talk to you later.
All right. Ciao.
Thanks for listening to The Wild Lab. If today's conversation stirred something in you and you're ready to connect to your own inner wildness, then check us out online on Instagram at Step Into Your Wild, or go on over to www.stepintoyourwild.com to learn more about our coaching services and wilderness academies offered through Walker's School of the Wild. Look, this is real work for real people who want to live with more clarity, more purpose, and more strength, but you don't have to figure it out alone. Let's walk this road together. Until next time, stay curious, stay connected, and stay wild.